Okay. So I was born in 1943, just around the time of the dam busters issues, and September 1943. And because of the war, my mother was asked to go to a nursing home which was in Kilburn. On my passport it says Hampstead, but I think that was just to make it sound a little bit posh. And then after that I went to live with my parents in my grandfather's public house, which is on the Whitechapel Road, on the corner of Valence Road, called the Black Bull. I lived in the East End until I was 24. So I moved out in 1968. So I lived after living in the pub in the East End. We all moved out. My grandparents died, and there was a few issues, family issues. I lived with my cousins, the Malpurgos, who were also all members of Brady Club. And I went to live in a block of flats called Wheeler House, which is in Quaker Street, which is in Commercial Street. And then eventually we moved to Batson House, which is in Fairclough Street, opposite the Oxford and St George's settlement, and opposite Harry Gosling's school, where I eventually went to primary school. My family, my father came from Białystok, which was in Belarus at the time, is now in Poland. My mother was born in this country and the family came from Romania. I had a brother and a sister who were considerably older than me. My brother was 13 years older than me, and my sister was 8 years older than me. They're no longer with us, as are my parents. They're all gone now. And my brother went to Rains, a foundation school in the East End, and my sister went to Spittal Square. And then I went to Harry Gosling Primary School, probably where I met Eric. Eric went to my friend Eric. It was a big Jewish population in my school, Harry Gosling. And when I was 7, 8, 9 maybe, I had lots of friends. But a particular friend, who was called Martin Goldman, who lived in Danvers House, which is just across the way from where I lived, he invited me to go around and to have tea at his uncle's house, which was in Stepney Green. His uncle turned out to be a man called Manny Brody, who had a Beigel bakery in the East End, nice man, who ran the scout troop at Brady Boys Club and encouraged me to become a scout, which I did. Which I was a Boy Scout at the 35th Stepney Brady's own troop from the age of probably 9 till I was about 13. I mean, I loved living in the East End. I mean, I think back, they were nice times, really. Life was simpler. I don't know, friendships were different. It was a nice time, and I enjoyed the Scouts. I liked all the stuff that we did. Gave us opportunities to go away, so not abroad, not at that time, but the club had this house called Skeet, and the Scouts were down there every other weekend. I mean, we used to go pretty often. They had a Scout hut there. And there were all the rooms there that we stayed in, and fields that we cooked in, and they were lovely times, really, and all the walks to and from the station, and it was a lovely existence. And as part of that, I got involved with the club, the boys' club, and I went to the summer camp every year, to Dartmouth and Tenby and the Isle of Wight, and loved it. The group was called the Miners, the Brady Miners, and the Scouts went with the Miners, basically. So I had lots of happy years there. I became aware of the group called the Brady Ramblers when I was at the club, and when I became 13, I decided that I was going to give up the Scouts, much to Manny Brody's regret. And I joined the Ramblers, and I joined them at a time when they were becoming quite well known. They were going, or had just been on a trip to Israel, and I joined the group. And I became very, very friendly with Greville Janner at that time. And I used to visit his house lots of times, weekends and what have you. And yeah, I found him a thoroughly nice man. And we did loads of stuff. Basically, we did some West End theatres. We did lots of charity work. We did. We visited old people's homes and sang for them. We did people's silver weddings and sang for them. And we appeared at the Royal Festival Hall with a couple of things, a few years. And it was lovely. It was just a nice thing to do. And I've always sung, and I still sing today. So, and I did that really until I got involved with girls. It was an idea of Greville Janner's. He was musical. I don't know if he played any instruments. I can't remember. But the group had also anybody. If you could play an instrument, they'd find a way for you to play it. Basically, we had a guy who played the violin. I played what they call an Arab drum. It's like a skin on top of a pottery thing. And there were harmonica players. There were some good singers, good voices. We sang mostly Jewish folk stuff, English folk stuff. Things like Michael rowed a boat ashore, I don't know if you know that song, and what else? I can't remember. But yeah, lots of Jewish tunes that and old country songs from this country as well. But we used to rehearse once a week generally. They oddly enough, people who were in the Ramblers, a lot of them were not really established club people. They came to Brady just to be in the Ramblers. And they were all different ages. So when I went in, for argument's sake, there was a guy called Johnny Romaine, who was a lot older than me. He ended up being a rabbi at Loughton Synagogue in Essex. And then eventually, as I say, I got older and he got interested in different things, went to work, basically in the city, and got interested in other stuff, so gave it up. But at that time also, they were running the holidays abroad, so we would go to Switzerland and have holidays there for a couple of weeks in youth hostels, and they were terrific. I mean, I don't know what they cost about. I don't know what they cost, 20 quid or something, 2 weeks. I was the first person in my family to go abroad on holiday, right? Excluding my father, who had already been on holiday and didn't come back because he emigrated from Poland. But I was the first person in my family to go on holiday. And that was quite an experience, really, for a 16-year-old in those days. So there was that as well. I went out with a few Brady girls, but nothing really lasted much. I can't remember how old we were, 16, 17. I got involved with a charity group raising money for the Jewish Blind Society with my friend Eric and a few other people. And we met other girls there as well. And I met a girl there and eventually married her sister. So that's what happened to me. But that didn't last, unfortunately. Well, it lasted nearly 20 years, but I didn't marry a club girl. Lots of guys did, you know. Yeah, my friend Eric did. I remember Carol, his wife Carol's a little girl at club. You know, she's quite a bit younger than me. But the club that I went to originally, which was in Durwood Street, was the boys' club. And I can visualise it in my mind, you know, that there was like a stage area downstairs somewhere. I think it was downstairs somewhere, that we used to have our Scouts meetings in, and in various rooms upstairs, and there was a canteen, and it was just a great place to go. I was probably there a lot in the week. And I tell you, one of the interesting things is that I look I look at the time that all happened. So the time that I was going to the Scouts, I would have been about 9, okay? And the time that I went to the Ramblers, I was about 13, right? So not, as a 9-year-old, I was walking to the club, which was a good mile away, maybe a bit further, in the East End, without any worries in the world. And I'm not sure that you let your 9-year-old do that journey today in the East End on their own. So that shows you a little bit about what the times were like in those days. Well, sadly, it was just after the war, so there were a lot of bomb sites in the East End, all over the place. But they were fantastic playgrounds for kids. I mean, you know, I was forever ruining my shoes by running around. I used to come back black from playing out in these bombed out houses and all sorts of things. I mean, it was ridiculous, really, that my mother would even let me do that. I mean, as a child, a young child, the territory that I covered was from Cable Street from Lemon Street to Cannon Street Road, and from Whitechapel to Cable Street. It's a big area, right? It's quite a big area. And we would be all around that area doing what, I can't remember, but you know, different people lived in different streets, so we'd end up visiting their houses, obviously. It was basically all that. We were outside all the time, you know, nothing like what the children do today, unfortunately. You know, our whole lives were spent out, round at people's houses, and when you think there's no mobile phones in those days, people had telephones, so you know, they were odd times. I remember when I lived in Wheeler House, so I would have been about 6. My dad bought the television, and nobody else had one. All the kids used to come up and watch this little thing, you know, with its flickering lights and all that sort of stuff. I mean, people today don't really realise what we had to put up with as far as televisions went in those days. You know, if it didn't work properly, you gave it a whack, which is quite, you know, valves in the back, and the pictures used to roll and horizontal hold used to go and stuff like that. So they were funny old times, really. You know, my parents were fairly. My father was or managed a clothing factory most of my life, you know, and he served in the back end of the First World War. So I've still got his medals in my safe at home. And my mother used to work in the pub that her father owned, but never worked whilst you know, for as long as I can remember. She never worked. She was a housewife. She cooked and did all that sort of stuff and gossiped with the neighbours and sat outside the door talking to people and whatever, friendly with this one and that one. They were quite simple lives, really, and much different to what we have today. My secondary school, I'm not sure if I mentioned that, was Rob Montefiore, which is in Valence Road. And the time there was interesting. I felt that I could have done better maybe if I'd have gone to a different school, but I left early. I decided not to stay on and do O-levels. And in fact, I did a degree at the Open University in my 30s because I felt that I didn't want my kids to have a slightly better education than me. They did in the end, but I mean, at the end of the day, at least I've redeemed myself by doing something, so I was quite happy to do that. But I did a lot of drama at school, as in a lot of the school plays, much to the detriment of my schoolwork, to be honest, because my form teacher was the drama teacher and forever trying to get me to do stuff, and it was taking me away from my studies, I think. But I did enjoy it. I liked performing. So, and I've never really, I was just about to say I've never really performed since, but however, when the club was 100 years old, they put on a show, and we did all the rehearsals at Edgware Maccabi, and Eric, my friend Eric, got me involved in that, and I had a part in that. I've got a film of that. It's a bit grainy and dark, but you can just about see what's going on. But someone got a camera up and took some pictures of it, that was very nice. They put a decent attendance, but I haven't really done anything. Maybe at the synagogue I was in the odd play. But in later life, basically, for me, if you want to know a bit more about me, I became involved in Freemasonry, still involved in Freemasonry today. So I'm 54 years a Freemason. One of my bosses that I worked for, I was friendly with a girl at club called Brenda Moss, and her father invited me to work for him for a while. My life in Freemasonry started when I was 24. And as I say, there was a guy called Joe Moss who took me in. And Freemasonry is a kind of friendly society, basically. Does a lot of good. Donates a lot of money to charity. We've just given a huge amount to the Ukraine appeal, 300,000 I think, this week. We do lots of charities, lots of ceremonial stuff, so it takes me back to my drama. So effectively, the bit that I used to do about drama, this series of small plays that the Freemasons perform as part of their ritual, and it's a good way to meet people. I've met a lot of interesting people through my life. I'm good friends today I've met through Freemasonry, and I also help run the Masonic Centre in Southgate when I can find time to fit all the other things in as well, or whatever. But yeah, I'd recommend anybody goes into Freemasonry. It's a good thing. There's women Freemasons as well. You might not know that, but there are. Yes, there are. Mixed Freemasons lodges as well now. So it's quite a big organisation throughout the world, and it's worth having a look online just to see a little bit more about it, because we're much maligned in the press, and most of it's a load of rubbish, really. You know, the whole point of Freemasonry is to do good, not to do bad stuff, really. There are bad people in Freemasonry. They get thrown out if they get found out, like everything else, but in general. But 40 years ago, I became involved by accident with a synagogue, which didn't exist. It was a new idea, and I, like I do in life generally, put my hand up and talked too much, and got involved and became the first chairman of the synagogue. And now, 40 years later, we're quite an established synagogue, Reformed synagogue, which is in Wanstead, in London E11. And I now work for the synagogue. Since I retired at 65, I now work for the synagogue. They're the things that I'm mostly involved with today. My wife and I like walking. We're always in town. We go back to the East End whenever we can. We walked all around Bishopsgate recently, you know, because of links with that in the past, you know. And I've got some cousins and friends. And occasionally we go back to the East End and have a curry. We haven't done it for a little while because of the pandemic, but we need to revive that again, I think.